Hi, loves, and welcome to the With Love Always podcast, a podcast to help you live the life you were created for. We are your hosts and your friends, Bree
and Marissa,
and we're so grateful you're here.
We pray you listen and leave feeling more inspired, encouraged, and uplifted. Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to be talking all about how to prioritize stillness. So, unpacking how we can find true rest for our souls. So, I just kind of want to go over what I believe true stillness looks like, why I feel like it's so important, and we're going to kind of share like what stillness looks like for us personally. I know it can take so many different forms, but really the goal and objective with this episode is I just want us to all kind of evaluate if we have space in our life for stillness, and if we don't, how that can kind of have an impact on us. And so how we can just kind of be proactive in facilitating times for intentional rest and the different forms that can take. So I feel like especially with kind of the holidays coming up, Thanksgiving, Christmas, this becomes like a very busy time in a lot of people's lives. And I know there's a lot of travel and just a lot of excitement and a lot of great things that take place. But I think it's easy to sometimes neglect our self-care practices or even just our time for ourselves where we can just kind of intentionally rest and recharge. So I really want this episode to be one that allows us to really be proactive going into the end of the year. I feel like this is kind of a check-in, but also just gives us a chance to unpack why this is so important and also why I'm feeling like especially passionate about this. And so I think to kind of just give a little bit of context, I recently am unemployed. So that has, as of like a few weeks ago, so that's just been really impactful for me because I naturally, like, I think when we're working, we're just going through like our day-to-day like rituals and routines, and like we're just kind of in this cycle. And it wasn't until I was, pressing pause on work that I realized, oh wow, I'm actually feeling so much fatigue in my body, both mentally and physically. And so this has really been a time where I've been just trying to reset, refocus, and just kind of become aware of how can I actually rest in a way that's really effective for me. And I just feel like the thing that God has kind of been reminding me of so much in this season is just how important stillness is. I think even I know my tendency when all of a sudden life slows down, I like almost felt that compulsion to just throw myself back in, and I'm like, okay, what's next? Or let me fill my schedule with all of these things, or let me rush into a new job, or all of this. And I really feel like God has so intentionally been reminding me this season is for a reason, and I want you to embrace stillness, and let's really press into it. So stillness might be a little bit uncomfortable for you. I know it's something that definitely takes me a second to adjust to. Yeah, I just kind of want to dive in. The verse that I'm using to kind of frame this whole conversation is just Matthew 11:28-30. And it reads, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I know I've read that verse in a previous episode, but I always just come back to that phrase, rest for your souls. And so for this whole conversation, like if nothing else, I hope we can just kind of better understand what rest for our souls looks like, because I think it's so important. And when I'm kind of using the word stillness, for me, that really looks like rest for your mind. And so it's not necessarily about just like sitting on your couch and being still. I feel like it is a very proactive and active state, and it really is resting, recharging for your mind, and ultimately for your soul. So to kind of kick this conversation off, I just want to ask you, there's so many ways to answer this, but why do you feel like we need stillness, whether it's something you've observed in other people or even just like personally?
Yeah, I love this question because almost of like the friction I feel being asked this question, I think this is such a conversation that even as someone who does feel like I prioritize stillness and alone time and recharging. I think with just the pace of life, I know for myself right now, like I've definitely been in a place this week where I'm like, I need to pursue stillness so much more. And I think about just the nature of our world, especially if you live in the US and you're listening to this. I think we're honestly just so programmed to be like filling our days to the brim. We're so programmed to be like on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And any sort of, token of free time you have, I think it's our natural instinct for most of us, at least for myself. If I have a free evening or a free moment on the weekend, like I automatically assume that I can use this as an opportunity to fill it with, spending time with someone else or going off to this event or going to this thing or doing this, whatever it may be. And even in moments when I find myself with free time on my hands, I can fall under the impression of, oh, well, I have to be productive. Like maybe I should go work out, or maybe I should work on this, or maybe I should do that. And while those things aren't inherently bad, they're also such beautiful things. I think so often, at least in observation of myself, and even most of us at our best, we can still be so afraid of stillness. And I think that stillness is, I think when we first think about it, we initially think about like work, for example, what you shared. I think we think about, oh, how often are we working, and, work-life balance separation. And I think that's where our minds first go to when it comes to stillness. But I think stillness is so much more than that. Like it's stillness and, your schedule outside of work. It's stillness in your relationships and your friendships, in your relationship with your romantic partner or your spouse, or any sort of dynamic in your life, of still giving yourself priority to have that stillness. It's giving your body stillness as well. I think as someone, for myself, like I'm in the wellness industry and fitness industry, and I see so much talk about, moving your bodies and doing all that, which is absolutely a form of stillness. I know for me, I love going on a walk and letting that be stillness. But I think even in that same breath, so many of us are just afraid of stillness with our bodies. Like we just are always under the assumption that we must be doing something to optimize our time, or even when we're resting and having a lazy day, we must be doing something that's semi-productive or something semi-orderly or whatever it may be. And so I think we all need stillness because, one, we deserve it in the midst of even when we feel like maybe we don't have that much going on. I think something I always encourage my friends as well as myself is we're always carrying and doing more than we believe we are. And so even us with our emptiest of schedules, you at any given moment deserve to give yourself credit for simply just being a human being. And that alone qualifies you for needing stillness in your life, because I think only from stillness and only from true rest with yourself and with your body and with your mind can you really, one, honestly just know what the inner workings of your mind are looking like and how you're really doing in life. And I think that stillness also translates into the excellence that you're able to execute in other areas of your life. I know for myself, when I'm operating out of a burnt out place, whether it's in work or in my friendships or in my personal day-to-day routines, I am just not optimal when I am trying to force myself to move past my capacities. So I think stillness is necessary because, like I said, it truly does equip us for excellence when we just choose rest.
Yeah, and I think I can't even imagine the amount of information our minds are just processing nonstop all day. Like, I truly know that our brains are not designed to not only be aware of, but also retain all of that information. And I think it's so important to just sit back and let your brain, I remember somebody was explaining this analogy to me, and I'm not really a tech person, so I don't know that I'm going to explain this completely correct, But basically, your computer's like always working. So, like, even if you're not actively on the computer, it's like processing all of that information in the background. And they were saying our brain kind of works in a similar way. So, when we actually rest and we let our mind just kind of sit there, it's allowing it to do essentially what we do in sleep, where it's actually processing all of the information we're receiving, which is in abundance. Like, there's so much, and there's something special when we can, like, if the first chance that you get to do that is when you lay your head on the pillow, you might struggle to actually fall asleep because your mind is trying to like play catch up and basically process all of that. So that's something I always think about during the day. I'm like, am I taking a second where I'm not just like consuming information or even music or even just noise and just sitting there and letting my brain play catch up and just process all of these things? I think that's so important for not only physically, but also just like mentally as well.
I feel like because we live in a world and a culture, and it sounds like so old of me to say, but like in a day and age where like social media is everything, I feel so funny saying that because, like, of course, we very much grew up in the social media world for the most part, but like in the sense of just growing up with that available to us, I think it can be really, really hard to identify when we need stillness because I think we're so used to running on autopilot and we're so used to like the pace of our own lives that we normalize it and we normalize the way our minds are feeling and the way our bodies are feeling and the way that we're operating. And honestly, if I'm being honest with myself, it's like really convicting to say, but I think I normalize at times, not always, but at times I normalize a level of burnout as just being the norm.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because I want to say like, I know that that's not normal, but at the same time, it feels it sometimes. And I know we all feel that sometimes as well. So I guess I would love, like, as we kind of dissect this conversation, I would love to hear from you. What are some of those like signals and signs that stillness is something that you're needing or that someone may be needing in their life?
Yeah. And that's such a good point that you brought up because I think it's not until like, even for me specifically, going back to like how I started this episode of just saying like, okay, I've actually been, intentionally resting for these past few weeks. And it's kind of that joke you see on social media where people are like, I thought I was this, but it turns out I just needed to take a vacation, or like, I'm getting my personality back. And honestly, I'm like, I feel like in a way I am getting my personality back. And it's not even like that other people might see it. They might think I'm exactly the same, but I
Feel it.
yeah, like it's not until you truly are rested and recharged that you realize, oh wow, I have not been operating from this place in a long time. For me, I'm like, what are the warning signs of my soul? Like, what are those little signals, whether it's like internal or external, that I can just look at to be like, whoa, I need to take a step back and I need to facilitate more stillness in my life. And I think one of the biggest ones is just emotional exhaustion. So for me, if I find myself, and a lot of times, again, like I'm someone who, if I'm feeling impatient or irritable, I'm not going to express that. Like, I think I'm really good at hiding that, but I still like know that within myself. I notice myself getting impatient in a conversation or somebody's saying something and it's irritating me when I know it shouldn't, or all of these little things, like even just a lack of grace, even if it's like you're in your car and you're just like, why am I in such a rush? Like, it was funny, but the other day I was driving through the canyon to get to the beach and there was this car behind me. Keep in mind, the car in front of us like was going very slow through the canyon. They were actually just going like the speed limit, but it felt slow. And this car behind, this is like a 25-minute drive, and they proceeded to honk. Like, they would honk for long periods of time, but then they would stop. And I just thought it was so funny. Like 10 or 15 minutes would go by and then they would choose to honk again. I'm like, what is it that's like triggering them to be like impatient in this specific instance?
That's such a
Because I'm like, there's nothing we can do. Like, this person is going at a pace that they feel like is safe and comfortable. You're not going to be able to speed them up. Why are we like randomly honking? We're going to get there in the same amount of time regardless.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so many times I feel like they're doing what we're all doing emotionally, where it's like, we know we have this set thing ahead, that there's no getting around this circumstance, and we just choose these random moments to just not have grace. And it's like these little outbursts, and again, we might not even be like visibly outbursting, but mentally that's what we're doing. And I'm like, man, we just need to pay attention to that. And I think there's just such a lack of grace for one another, and I think we're so quick to be reactive to situations. And I get it, because I think that really is such a signal of like, if most of us are functioning from a place of burnout or exhaustion or emotional exhaustion, that so is the response. Like, we really don't have that extra stored up capacity to extend grace or extend patience. But for me, I feel like just those little emotional signals are so indicative of like, okay, have I made that like storage in my mind, in my like emotional capacity, so that when these things happen, which inevitably they will, I actually can be patient, or I can take a deep breath and I'm not having to react to a situation. I think so often we can almost feel like a victim to our circumstances, but I think it's because we don't have that like extra bandwidth to just react in the way we want to, or to realize we actually do have control. We can control how we are responding to the situation. And so, yeah, I think there are so many signals, but I would say definitely those little like emotional signals.
Yeah. This is such a funny metaphor that I was thinking of as you were speaking. I don't know what you said specifically, but it kind of made me think of this metaphor. But my phone storage has been like full, and it is the most frustrating thing in the world, because there will be moments when I go in to take a picture or I go in to download an app and my phone tells me my storage is full. And so I get frustrated, and my response is I go in and try to delete some photos or offload an app or delete something I downloaded. And the frustration that I feel, because my phone is at capacity, and what I have to do when my phone is at capacity is I have to react and then go delete things and remove things in order to get that 1% capacity back. I think that's honestly such a metaphor for us as humans. When our storage and our capacity is full, we have to be reactive. We get frustrated because we can't take that photo that we want to take, or we can't go do that thing or show up for that friend or perform at work, and we're frustrated because we keep having to be so reactive to the world around us, when in reality, if we would just empty our storage a little bit, free up our capacity, and give ourselves more time in the day to just prioritize ourselves, like, we wouldn't have to be reactive, just like I wouldn't have to be reactive and go and try to delete apps on my phone every time I'm trying to take a photo. It is such a parallel, like, in ways we can operate as that phone that's full of storage with nothing left to give, no ounce of anything else. And we need to go through and start deleting some things that don't need to be there in our lives or in our days or in our weeks. So when the moment comes when we want to go do this thing, it can be with joy, and it can be without, I don't know, an obstacle in place that's frustrating us or whatever it may be.
That's such a good analogy. I love that. And I think it is such a good depiction that, like, yes, that seems so intuitive. Like when somebody says that and it's like, okay, you just need stillness or rest, or
sounds like cute.
Yeah,
yes, I do.
I'm like, that's amazing. But I don't have time for that. But then I start to actually unpack my day. And yes, days are busy, and I think we all do have so much going on, but I also think there are moments that we all have for stillness or rest throughout the day. And though it might be small or just a few minutes, I think we're almost so uncomfortable with it that we tend to fill it with just things that actually are the opposite of that, truly. And so I'm curious, like, if you ever catch yourself doing that, and I mean, we all do, but like, what are some of those things that when you finally have, 5 minutes, whether it's like in the car or to step outside for a second, that it can feel almost like intuitive to like reach for the phone or whatever it
Yeah.
might be?
Oh man, I've actually felt so convicted of this lately. Like specifically, I was talking with some friends last night and I was like, I need to get some of my habits in check right now because I think for me, and this can also be a result of a lack of stillness. I think a lack of stillness produces more lack of stillness.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when I know I need to slow down or I need to sit with myself or I need to process things, it's so opposite and is like literally the exact thing that doesn't help that. But I can see myself get avoidant. And I think because my entire career is in social media, I do spend so much time on social media, which I absolutely love and is such an honor. And it's such a gift that I think can be used for so much good. But at least in this season, like ways I've seen myself avoid stillness is spending mindless time on social media. And I think that is like, whoa, the number one thing that does not help because just exactly what you said. I had this like, I mean, I think about this all the time, but it really hit me this past week of, oh my gosh, the amount of information I am consuming post after post, visual after visual. This cannot be good for my mind, like it cannot be producing any stillness. It's like overpopulating my mind when in reality, all my mind and all my heart really needs is for me to be present with myself. But I also notice like other ways that I can avoid stillness or just time with myself is listening to music. I love listening to music so much. Like I just love it. And there's nothing wrong with listening to music. But I say this in the context of I know there's times when I'm like, I really should just journal right now, or I should pray right now, or I should just sit in silence on this car ride because I need to be present with my own mind. And instead, I'll turn on music because it's kind of like this comfort to fill the space and keeps me in this place of avoidance of facing what I need to face within my own mind. And I think so many of us, whether we're super conscious of it, just as I explained, or maybe we're not conscious of it, I believe so many of us do these things. And not that scrolling on social media is a bad thing, not that listening to music is a bad thing. It only is a hindrance when you know it's in direct avoidance of being present with yourself. And I even think for me, like there's even been times, which I don't feel like I ever hear people talk about this, but there's been times when I know I need to journal or pray that morning or that afternoon, and I choose to work out instead. And what a blessing is it that moving your body is a source of release and it can be your form of stillness. It so often is my form. But at the same time, that's where everything has to come into perfect balance and perfect harmony, because there are times when I am very aware that though I want to move my body and though there's time in the day to do that, in this moment, my mind needs priority and precedent over moving my body. And me continuing to avoid what my mind needs is actually not helping it in that moment. And so it's such a fine line, and it's something that really you only can tell yourself what is good and healthy in a moment and what's not. Because from the outside looking in, like I said, working out, great thing to turn to. Listening to music, great thing. Social media can be a beautiful tool. But when it's used as distraction, avoidance, it's not healthy. And even recently, I may have mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm not really good at watching shows or TV, but I have been watching Stranger Things recently. And it's so addicting to like get into a show and like get sucked into it. And that can definitely be a form of stillness. Absolutely. But like I said, it's not true stillness if you're doing it to avoid other things. And I've seen myself being like, I don't want to think about this, so I'm just going to turn on the show and avoid things. That's not healthy. So yeah, those are my personal escapes and distractions, and maybe there's some of yours too. So with all that said, like I think some of those things are so beautiful and are so restful, and I definitely do turn to those things for rest. But I do want to encourage all of us in this conversation. Like, there is such a distinction between just the physical rest, but then the rest that comes within your soul and within your spirit, within your heart, and within your mind. And so I would love to hear from you just personally, like, what is your experience with that rest, that true, deep, intentional rest for your soul?
Yeah, and I think this is something that's taken me like a long time to figure out. And I do kind of have a formula, which it almost feels like silly to say out loud. But again, there's so many different ways you can go about this. But for me, when I am like SOS, my body is depleted, my go-to is I just step outside. So it doesn't really matter like where I go. I just know for me, I physically need to get out of the house or out of a room, and I just need to be in nature. A lot of times for me, that's just in my own backyard, like whatever is closest by. And I will just leave like all technology, all work, all like thoughts, all life kind of just behind. And I will just step outside. I'll grab my Bible, my journal. I just get a highlighter, a pen, and I just will like sit outside in the sunshine. And just honestly, like sometimes I close my eyes, sometimes I just sit there and pray, or just I don't even think about anything. If I notice that there's like a lot of thoughts surfacing, because I think it's easy when we haven't like been exercising stillness often, like we'll have all of these thoughts surface. So for me, I'll just like open up my journal and I'll just write them all down so I can just like dump them all in a place. And for me, my goal is really to just leave that place with like all of my thoughts and all of my stress just behind. So I like to physically put that out, or physically like say that in prayer of like what's on my heart, what's on my mind. And then for me, like sometimes I'll open up and just like meditate on a verse. But I think the most important part for that is truly just sitting there and forcing myself not to think about anything or do anything. Because I know like even for me, when I spend like my daily quiet time, I'm like trying to get through like chapters of the Bible, and I'm highlighting things and I'm trying to learn something new. So for me, like when I'm really trying to exercise stillness, I'm like, this is not about accomplishment or productivity or all of that, which ironically it is the most like productive thing you can do. But truly it's about like getting comfortable with being uncomfortable in that stillness, like sitting there when I suddenly start to think of all the things I want to do, just like truly getting to that place where I am finally comfortable just sitting and being and existing. And when I can finally get there, I start to truly feel like it is honestly wild when I like come back inside, or I, come back to doing what I was doing that day. I am shocked because I feel like I have such an overflow. Like it really feels like my battery was just plugged in and at 100%. Like I can't even describe it, but I feel like just allowing my mind to play catch up and allowing myself to even just spend quality time with God and not having to even say anything, but just truly existing like in his presence, existing with the feeling of like the sun on my skin. That for me, like the best way to describe it is just that my soul feels recharged. Like there's just no other feeling that I've ever experienced that's quite like it. So yeah, I don't know like if you even have something that you like to do. I feel like everybody, it's different. Sometimes even stillness looks like going on a walk, or like people need to physically be active in that process. But for me, that's like my recipe where it just is my go-to. I know it's gonna fill me up unlike anything else.
I love that so much. I always hear like the power of just the sun is insane, but specifically I've heard that getting sunshine like pretty soon after you wake up is so helpful for you. And so that's actually a form of stillness I've been trying to implement more, even if it is just like when I wake up walking outside and just letting the sun hit my face and like embracing the warmth of it. But something that I have actually recently been doing more is I think sometimes I know for myself, my days will just escape me or my mornings will escape me. And I've honestly been in a rhythm where I just feel like I haven't been very intentional with prioritizing time journaling or reflecting or even thinking about my day. And that for me is the worst feeling, when I just feel like the days will come and go and I'm on autopilot and I'm like, I can't even tell you what happened today because I'm not sitting with my mind and processing what happened. And so something I've actually been doing as of this week is before bed, and I don't set any sort of amount of time because I think sometimes that, at least for me, can defeat the purpose of stillness of I have to do this for a certain amount of time, certain amount of pages, whatever. But before bed, I've just been journaling. And I mean, I think about this week, it's Friday when we're filming this. Some days I journaled for 10 minutes. One night I journaled for an hour and a half and I just got lost and was up till midnight journaling. And I think just not putting a cap on or any expectation of what that brain dump needs to look like for me, but just giving myself permission to like actually be present with my mind. I know another way that I love to do this that some of you guys may do is going on walks, but really encouraging you to be so present and like don't bring your AirPods. For safety, maybe bring your phone, but if you can leave it behind, leave it behind. I know there's times I'll leave it behind just because I know my neighborhood super well. And I will just either listen to the sounds of nature or even the cars passing on the street, or I'll just think, or I will do nothing and I'll just let my brain be empty. And like my ultimate form of stillness for me will always include something to do with nature, I would say. And so I think about times when I have faced that like extreme burnout or like lack of stillness, and it's like kind of confronts me in my mind and my body, and I'm like, I'm so exhausted, like I don't know what to do. I will walk myself to the beach and I will just lay in the sand by the ocean and I will just listen to the sound of the waves crash. And I know not all of us live by the ocean, but I imagine that all of us have access to some sort of form of nature. And truly for me, in those moments when I'm like at a breaking point and I just need to literally lay there and look so silly in the sand, not laying on a towel, not laying because I'm tanning, not laying because I just swam, but laying there because I literally feel like I could cry. I just need true stillness. I think there's so much power in when we like really just connect with nature in that way to some sort of capacity. I know for me, it feels so rejuvenating, and not putting a cap on it, not putting a time frame on it, and not worrying what other people may be thinking. I think that's been such a beautiful source of stillness for me. And yeah, it's so hard because it is such a unique question person to person. And there are times where stillness, even the things that I said were distractions, sometimes my stillness includes those distractions, and that is stillness for me in those moments too. So it really is such an individual journey, but I think ultimately, when you have like avoidant energy within your body, when something doesn't feel right, when you're exhausted and when you feel like you're emotionally could have an outburst at any second. And I think when you evaluate that and even just the pursuit of trying to solve that for yourself, I think is going to be the thing that achieves that rest for your soul that we've been mentioning and talking about.
I was just wanting to ask you, and I feel like I'm going to try to get better about asking all of my friends this just so that we can hold each other accountable of just like, is there margin in our life for stillness, or is it kind of like an afterthought? Like, do we not notice we need it until we're starting to feel some of those like warning signs?
Yeah. I would say for me personally right now, kind of like what I was sharing earlier in the episode, I think I've been feeling really convicted lately that it has been more so an afterthought for me. And I'm so well aware that, yes, the pace of life is one thing, but it's honestly just been my choice. Like, I think I've been choosing avoidant distractions. I've been choosing to fixate my mind and my time on other things. And it's so easy to do that. Like, I think we can all agree there's always something to fill our times with, or there's always something to do and something to work on and something to distract ourselves with. But I think it's so easy. Like, it has to be in such harmony and such balance. Otherwise, the moment that it starts leaning one way, like too much stillness is also not a good thing. Too much work is also not a good thing. So it's like it has to be in perfect harmony. And so I would say right now for me, it's been an afterthought. And so I need to create that intention once again of moving forward and making it my daily priority and making sure that if I'm caring for the other things in my life so much, like I should be caring for myself as well. So yeah, I think that's where I'm at right now. But yeah, like I said, I think for me, I've honestly been reflecting on it, and it really isn't even one of those things where I don't necessarily think I don't have time. I don't think I'm choosing the time, but I'm sure there's so many people out there that may feel like, gosh, I just don't have time for stillness, or I feel like my time is escaping me, or, my days are too full or too busy. And so I think with this conversation, I would love to hear too of like, what would you say or encourage someone who feels like, man, I would love to be still and I would love to rest, but I just do not have the time in my day.
Yeah, and that's something I used to truly believe, but when I actually started to look at my schedule, I realized stillness was always like the afterthought. It was like, okay, I'm going to get through my day, and then like if I have extra time, I'll just like sit and journal or do these things that I actually really want to do. And so I just started to rearrange my schedule to what is the most important thing. And for me, like, especially in this season, it is stillness, and I want to prioritize that. So that has to be the first thing I do when I wake up. And I would just say, like, very practically putting it on your calendar. And then that's where like discipline and diligence, I think, is so important to honor that commitment. But yeah, it can be tricky too. And like, I feel like I've heard people say, because I've said it as well, like we look at our calendar and we're like, okay, but like I want to put it in, but where does it even fit into my schedule? And that's where I feel like, honestly, like boundaries are so important. I think we just have to limit other things. So even if that means limiting good things like work or even just like social activity, I think we just have to even create some sense of limit. Otherwise, we are going to not be able to do things that we truly care about doing. And so, like in this case, if it's stillness, but even this can extend beyond anything in your life that you want to prioritize, boundaries really create that limit to be like, okay, yes, I want to commit to this thing, or no, I don't. And so therefore I have space to actually let my schedule reflect what my values are, because I think sometimes it can almost be the opposite. It can feel like a bonus of like, oh, you're so fortunate that you can invest in these things. But I'm like, no, I have to. Like, this just ultimately, every other decision in my life has to work around these things that are most important to me, which really is like stillness and spending time with God and making sure that like my mind is in a healthy place, because ultimately, if that's not in check, everything else is going to suffer. Like, everything else in my life is going to start to feel the side effects of that. And so, yeah, I would just say like being intentional, planning for that, setting like healthy boundaries, and being so discerning with where we put our time. And also just recognizing that stillness is so productive, and it is something that we are accomplishing something. Like, we might not even feel like it in that moment, but I think just recognizing that, wow, if I do nothing else today, this was intentional, and I'm accomplishing something that's preparing me not only for today, but also for the weeks and the months to come. Like, it really is building up that storage of that emotional and mental capacity. So yeah, if you take like nothing else from this episode, I would love to just encourage you that this is something that's so productive. And when we can, feel a sense of like accomplishment in that, and you'll start to feel that your bandwidth really starts to extend in every other area. Okay, you guys, it is time for love notes. I figured on the theme of like stillness and rest, we could do a little this or that relaxing edition.
Yeah.
So we're just going to say what we think would be more relaxing in our opinion. It's a little tricky because I feel like all of these activities are pretty relaxing.
Yeah.
But starting with the first one, would you say a spa day or a beach day is more relaxing?
I would say for me personally, I would choose a beach day.
I love a good beach day. I've actually never really had a spa day. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that maybe that would be more relaxing. Or I don't know, that just sounds kind of fun. I'm in the mood for a spa day.
Honestly, that sounds fine.
But I'll choose that.
That's a good one.
I think it's because I really want to. I've never done a sauna.
What? I did not know that.
I just have been seeing so many people doing like cold plunge sauna situation. And I'm like, I want to get on that level. Like, I need to make that happen.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's not something I do actively like day in, day out, but it is getting a lot of hype nowadays.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is reading a book or watching a show.
Ooh. So the thing is about me is I have a really hard time watching shows or movies unless I'm doing it as a form of quality time with other people. So if I'm doing it with other people, definitely I would say watching a show. It's so fun for me. I love that quality time. I don't really read that much. So I would say watching a movie with like a friend. I love that. That's so relaxing.
That's sweet. I do feel like that's really relaxing. I'm just going to say reading a book, maybe because for me, that is a little more rare. But I feel like if I can get to the mental place to even like read a book, I'm already more relaxed.
Yeah.
The next one is music or podcast.
So I know that we have a podcast. But I would say I tend to listen to music more to relax me. So I would say music.
I think I might actually be switching on this. I used to be such a podcast person, but now I don't know. I don't know if it's like your influence unintentional, but I feel like you just talk about how like you like almost romanticize listening to music
so much, like, and so much.
I love it, and now I'm like so excited about building out my playlists. So I've been getting into music, so I think that would be more relaxing.
That's the highest compliment.
Okay, next one is tropical vacation or cozy cabin getaway.
Oh man, I do love both. I really, really do so much, but I feel like I would be tropical. I do, just because I just love being able to like go out in the nature and be wearing like a swimsuit, and yeah, I love that so much. I do love being cozy, but after being cozy for a couple days, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be cold anymore. So I would say tropical for me.
Yeah, I love the idea of like a cozy cabin, but honestly, I get a little stir crazy after
that's what I was gonna say.
Which,
unless you're hitting the slopes and you're like,
yeah,
you're skiing or snowboarding, but even that for me, because I'm not an expert, give me one day on the mountain, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm done.
So I would say like tropical vacation, it's just so hard not to be relaxed.
Yeah,
like in a tropical environment.
Yeah. Oh.
Ooh, now I'm ready. Hawaii, here we come. Okay, long drive or long bath?
I never take baths.
Me neither. I don't know. I'm shocked I came up with this one.
That's so funny.
I never take a bath.
I never take a bath. Honestly, I do love a bath once in a while. But I feel like I actually get stir crazy at the bathtub because I'm just sitting there in a hot tub, which I guess is the same thing as like a jacuzzi. But
yeah,
I think a long drive, like, and truly I say that, it's so funny because whenever I drive over here to podcast record, given it's probably because of the time of day that I drive over, it's usually faithfully like 50 minutes. And I kid you not, every time that I pull up to your house, I'm like, oh, dang it. Like, not dang it to see you, but like, oh, I wanted to finish listening to more songs. And I was like, Bree, You were listening to music for 50 minutes. Like, how much more time do you want? But it just flies by for me. Like, I love that time for me. So long drive for sure.
I think I'm the same way. I'm not a bath person, and I don't think I'm a jacuzzi person either.
Yeah.
I honestly don't like sitting in warm water. Something about it.
It feels wrong.
Yeah. And so I'm not like a huge drive person, but I feel like a good no traffic, like 45-minute drive, especially at night, and I can just like decompress. I do really enjoy that.
Me too.
I just think if there's traffic, it makes it not relaxing. But I don't mind driving if there's like no traffic. It's perfect.
I agree.
Okay, last one. If you're going to have a relaxing night at home, do you cook or do you do takeout?
Gosh, so I feel like I've been more in the habit of like doing takeout, but I think when I think of what's actually the most relaxing, it's like me cooking my own dinner at home, whether it's by myself or with a friend, and the satisfaction of cooking or eating something you just made. That's so relaxing. So I would say cook at home.
I would love to say cook at home, and here's my downfall. Like, I do cook a lot, but I just do not find it that relaxing. And I think my issue is it almost feels like necessity, or like I'm almost hungry at that point.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, let's just like make this as quick as I can. So honestly, like the thought of getting takeout delivered, like that sounds really relaxing.
Yeah. Here's my theory. Maybe because you're more faithful and eating at home, you want to reward yourself with takeout. I'm working on it. I've been in a not so great habit of eating out a lot. Also with travel, that naturally means you're eating out. So when I get the opportunity where I'm like, I'm so proud of myself, I got my groceries and now I get to cook them, relaxing. So that's my theory.
Oh, I like that. Also, it's easier here because I'm like, there's so many good food options in LA.
It's so tough.
And I'm like, yeah, here there's just not as much. So I'll be like, nothing sounds good. So I'll just make myself something.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, you guys, that concludes our episode. We hope you, as always, enjoyed it and can just have more stillness and rest and just feel recharged. And we are so excited to see you in our next one. Thank you so much for listening. We pray this episode was encouraging and life-giving. If you found it valuable, please share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe.
And be sure to follow us along over on Instagram at With Love Always Podcast. Signing off with all of our love always, Bree
and Marissa.